Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Remnant Mentality Ministry Sunday Youth Services. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Marie Rogers, and I thank God for another opportunity to be here before you today. And I thank each and every one of you for joining in. I'm not sure how what social platform you're looking at us on, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, but we are on all of them. So if you have not subscribed or you're not old enough to subscribe on YouTube, ask a family member or whoever you're with, a friend. You can share the messages as well, but ask them to help you subscribe on YouTube or ask them to subscribe on YouTube. This way, and hit the alert button. This way you get any time that someone from Remnant Mentality is live, you'll be alerted and you'll get to come on in here, chime in and look at us live. Okay. And again, share, like, comment. If you have a comment, you have a question about something, go ahead and put that type it in the comment box if you like. So this morning we are going to go over Genesis chapter 13. We covered chapter 12 last week, and I'll sum it up before we actually start, and then we'll get on with chapter 13. Okay. So before we do, let's say a prayer. Father God, I thank you. I thank you, Lord, for another day. I thank you for a fresh start to a new week, Lord. Lord, thank you for all that you're doing in each of our lives. Lord, I just ask as we cover Genesis chapter 13 today, Lord, that you just open up our ears and our heart, Lord, ready to receive this message. And hopefully we can see, Lord, that your love is so unconditional for us, and teach us to be more like Abram, selfless, and teach us to be humble so that even when we make a mistake, Lord, that we're able to still come back to you and know that you're so faithful to us, Lord. Lord, we thank you for just being a promise keeper. And it may not work out in our time. We may not understand it, but Lord, you are a promise keeper. We're going to see that in today's lesson, Lord. Lord, I just ask that you keep each and every one of us safe as we go about our day, Lord. Lord, I ask that you continue to bless each and every one of us abundantly and our family, Lord. So, Lord, I thank you. You get all the praise, you get all the honor. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, so we are going to go over, like I said, Genesis chapter 13, and it's 18 verses. It's not too long, but what I wanted to do is I'm going to put this up here because this is what we're going to be going over. But what we learned last week in chapter 12, we had Abram, who was called by God. He was told by God, actually, hey, you need to leave where you're at and you need to go to Canaan. And what Abram did at the time, he took his wife, he took his nephew, which God didn't tell him to bring Lot. His nephew was Lot, but he did. And then he tells them to go to Canaan. They make their way to Canaan. However, it was a famine, right? So there wasn't enough. There was the food and the water resources for them to survive. They lacked it severely. So at that time, Abram decided, hey, we're going to keep going south, and they go into Egypt. Now, the first thing is he wasn't obedient because he didn't do exactly as God told him. God didn't tell him to bring Lot. The second thing was he did listen, and he went to Canaan, but when he got there, he decided to leave. So we learned that was the first test of his faith towards what God had told him, because instead of him staying put or saying, okay, God, I'm here, what would you have me do? He decided on his own, hey, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to Egypt. Then before they get to Egypt, he tells his wife, hey, listen, you may not want to say you're my wife. They may kill me. They won't hurt you. But he was fearful of his life, and so he told Sarah to say that she was his sister. So not only did he want to keep the secret and not tell the truth, he had Sarah do it as well. That was the second test of faith that he had. But then they get there, and Pharaoh understands she's beautiful, and so that's why Abram was afraid, and he thought that they would probably want her because she was so beautiful, she was pretty, and that's exactly what ended up happening. He did pass her off as a sister. The Pharaoh ended up giving him more cattle, even though Abram already had enough cattle and gold and silver. He ended up collecting a whole bunch more, pretty much in exchange for Sarah, which he ended up having. And then later on, we find out Pharaoh, he didn't know at the beginning, but then bad things started to happen, and he started to question Abram and ask what he did, and he found out that was actually his wife. Pharaoh is still fearful of God, right? So he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do anything harmful to Abram, but he yet tells him to get out, get all of his things, and then he has to leave. All of them have to leave, which they do. And that brings us to where we're at today in Genesis 13, chapter 1 through 18. And the first chapter, and I'm going to read some of it straight from the Bible. And this is in King James. And I may switch Bibles and I'll let you know. But in King James, it says, and Abram went up and out of Egypt, and he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot went with him. Went with him into the south. So remember, Lot was with him as well. They were all told to get out. Now remember, Abram was very rich. He was rich already, but he's collected all of this stuff from Pharaoh when he was down in Egypt. So he has all of these belongings with him. It's a ton of stuff that he has. If we go on to verse 3, it says, and he went on his journeys from south, even to Bethel, which is the house of God, where his tent had been set up at the beginning. So remember, when he went to Canaan, he set up there, and he didn't leave until he ran into the famine. So now on their way back, this is where he stops at. This is where he's at. And it's almost like now he realizes his mistake. He's back in that same area. Remember, he had built an altar there. So he's back at the same place after he gets out of Egypt. Verse 5 says, and Lot also went with Abram, who had flocks, herds, and tents. So Lot has some stuff also. He may not have had as much, but he had a lot of belongings as well. But the land was not able to bear them that might dwell together. They both had so much stuff that there was no way that the land can hold all of them. Now, here's the thing. We got to remember from chapter 12, Lot wasn't supposed to be there. When God told Abram to go, it was for him to go there. The land he had promised was for him. All those things that he promised, it was for Abram. It wasn't for Abram and whoever else he asked to come with him. So that's part of the problem, that it was never supposed to be both of them. So now they find themselves there, and all of them have all this cattle and gold, just a ton of stuff, just sources that they have that is too much for them to be at that particular place. So part of the other thing is, as the families increase, of course, the flocks started to increase, right? And because the flocks were great, the Canaanites and I hope I say this right, Perizzites had already occupied a considerable part of the land. So they were the villagers. They were already there. And you had the Canaanites who lived there also. So you have them on a substantial part of the land. And now you also have Abram and Sarah with all of their flock. And then you have Lot with his flock and everything else that he brought as well. So it was quite a lot that they had. But again, they couldn't live together. So this is what Abram says, right? Abram's like, well, look, to prevent any disputes with them, because they was already starting to have problems. He didn't want to break up the family. They were relatives. He didn't want that, what was going on, try to come in between what was actually happening. And sometimes we do that, right? You ever know anyone that they sit there and says, oh, I haven't talked to my sister for 10 years. I haven't talked to my uncle for 15 years. And then you ask them why, and it's like, I don't know. We just got into an argument. Well, Abram didn't want the same thing to happen, right? He realizes it, that yes, it's a lot here, but he's trying to be humble and he's trying to say, you know what, we're going to figure this out, because we're not going to keep arguing over anything like this. So Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife. He's like, let there be no hate, no arguing over it. He says, I pray between me and you, and between his herdsmen and Lot. So what happened was, the herdsmen of both Lot and Abram has started to bicker, right? They started arguing amongst each other. And it could have been a little bit of envy, a little bit of jealousy as well between each of the herdsmen. But what Abram didn't want to happen is, not only are the herdsmen going back and forth, he honestly did not want to see him and Lot go after it also. Because there was no reason to. They had enough of their own stuff to be able to survive. But bottom line is, Abram was supposed to be there anyway and not Lot. So Abram tells him, at this time, like I said, he's like, there's this bickering, this argument between the herdsmen, you and I. Abram says, let's not have disagreements and arguments. We're not going to do that. He said, so he tells Lot, look at there. Is there not all this land out there? He says, how about this? Right? Essentially, he says, how you separate from me? How about If you go right or you go left, I'll go right. You go right, I'll go left. And just depart. Just go. Just pretty much be happy. Because now Abram in his mind, I would imagine now he's probably remembering the peace and the promise of God, right? Because God already told him he was going to give him the land. And Abram could have very well said, you know what, this is my land. This is where he's the selflessness comes in, right? Because he could have said, this is my land anyway. What are you doing here? Just go, be gone, take you and all your stuff. But he didn't do that. What he did is said, you know what, Lot, pick a place. Look out all of the land. Pick a place. Where do you want to go? And Lot did exactly that, right? Lot was his nephew. So Lot, he just lifted up his eyes. And just as far as he can see, he decided on the plain of Jordan. Now, at this time when he looked out, he saw the vegetation and he saw that it was nicely watered and that it had foliage, a lot of plants and green. And so, excuse me. And so that was the stretch of land that Lot looked at. And he don't, like I said, he only saw what he could see with his eyes. He didn't question, hey, what's over there? He didn't say, well, not only did he not ask God, he didn't even ask his uncle. He just basically looked and said, oh, that looks good. That looks like someplace I want to be. It's almost like Egypt, nice and green and has water. It's abundant in everything that I need. That was his whole thing. And that's where he messed up, because he was just thinking of himself at this time, even though Abram pretty much said, hey, pick a place, just go somewhere. But he only looked as far as his eyes could see. If we move down to verse, and that was verse 10. If we go down to verse 11, it says, Lot chose all the plain of Jordan. And so he decided that was east. So he journeyed east and they separated themselves one from another. Once Lot left, Abram does his thing. He leaves. The place that Abram traveled to was, Lot traveled eastward. Now he could have, if you know rights, he could have said when Abram said, "Oh, pick a place." He says, "You know what, Uncle? No, you are wiser. You're older. You're my uncle. The land was promised to you. You find out where you want to go, and I'll be away from you if that's what works." He didn't even do that, right? He still just thought about himself. And when Abram said, hey, look around, he did just that. He looked around, but he just thought of himself. He just, oh, yep, I can see that. It's all green. It has water. Great. This is where I want to be. And that's exactly what he did. So Abram, if we go down to verse 12, Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan. Remember in chapter 12, this is the exact place God told him he wanted him, and that's where he promised him the land. And so he found himself in Canaan. And sometimes that happens to us, right? And you may not have experienced it yet, but it will eventually happen where God leads us in a direction where whether we ask him or he tells us, we get to that place or we do that thing that he says, it doesn't feel right to us. We don't ask God again. And so we come to our own understanding and we decide to do things on our own way, which in this case, that's what Abram did. And that's why he found himself in Egypt and found himself having to tell a story along with his wife, making her not tell the truth just to save his soul when technically he shouldn't have been there. So Abram settled in Canaan where God originally told him to. And then Lot settled near Sodom and Gomorrah. We have not covered that yet, which we will. But just know that Sodom it was a very wicked place. A lot of sinners, they did some unruly, some unrighteous things. They just did everything against God. Everything that they should have done right, thinking about God, the Christian way, the believer's way, they did not. They did the exact opposite. Now, remember that Lot didn't see any of that. He didn't ask those questions. He just looked wherever his eyes took him and saw the green and saw the water, and just in his mind was thinking, oh yeah, that's beautiful. It's like Egypt, this is where I want to be. Never thought to ask, what kind of people are there? Are there people there? Will I be able to survive there? How about my flock, my cattle? He never asked any of those things. He just saw what he saw with his eyes, and to him that was pleasing. And so that's a lesson for us, right? Because sometimes things look better than what they are, and we get a real surprise because in our mind, because it looks nice, we think it's nice. We think it's for us because, hey, I was told to take it. I was told to go there. I was told I can have it. And we don't use good judgment. So we have to make sure we're using good judgment also, because Lot may have been able to find this out had he just asked. And even if he hadn't asked his uncle, if he had asked God, if he had gone to him, if he would have communicated with him to find out, right? But he may have been thinking the other way as far as greed and said, oh, I got me some land. He says, I can take whatever I want. And that's what ended up happening. So in verse 14, so after Lot and Abram separated, now God comes back, right? He talks to Abram because he just wants to talk to him one-on-one. Because this whole time, he had Sarah, he had Lot with him. He's in Egypt, he's with Pharaoh, he's doing all these things. And sometimes when our mind is clouded or we get super busy with a lot of other stuff, what tends to happen is we just assume that, well, God's still there. He's waiting for us. And when I get a break, he'll be there, right? We do it. I do it. We do it. We just get so busy in our day-to-day things. So now that Lot is separated from Abram, God says to Abram, okay, look, he says, even though, he gave the land to Abram. He promised him that when we talked about it back in chapter 12. But he says, even though Abram gave some of that portion of the land to Lot, which is applaudable, right? Commendable. He still lets Abram know that the land is yours, right? That was my promise to you. God's a promise keeper. He didn't take it away from him, even when he went to Egypt first, right? Even though he didn't stay in Canaan and he ended up going down to Egypt before coming back to Canaan. God still says, hey, this is my promise. And he tells him again, he emphasizes again to him, look, I told you the land is yours. So he lets him know that. So he tells him, lift up your eyes, look around, right? Like he wants him to see. I don't know if any one of you have ever gotten something that you really, really wanted, or something that was promised to you and you have been waiting for a while, and all of a sudden you get it. And it's like, do I really have it? Is it really mine? And it is. And so God is telling him, like, open your eyes, look from the place, look northward, southward, eastward, and westward, because he wants him to know, like, this is all yours. This is all for you. Just like I told you it would be, right? He wanted him to know that his promise to him was fulfilled. And Abram should have felt that. Like, God, you told me this. I don't know why I tried to take a shortcut. I don't know why I was disobedient. I don't know why I wanted to do things in my own understanding. Because he had faith enough to follow. When he told him to leave, he left. But then it stopped. Right? And we do that sometimes, like I said, right? I can say I've done it. I'm sure I'll probably do it again, just not thinking that when things don't happen in the right way or the time that we expect it to happen, we tend to get impatient and we start to do things our own way. So the Lord unfolded his promise to Abram in the land stretching out as far as each direction. He said, this is it. This is you. In verse 15, it says, for all the land which thou seest to thee, will I give it to you and thy descendants forever. So remember this, Abram and Sarah, they were old, right? They had no kids, but God told him in chapter 12, he mentioned it then, that the land will be for him and he's going to multiply and he's going to have land for his descendants. And he tells him that again. Sarah still doesn't have any kids, but he tells him that again. So then we go up to, and he says, I will give you and your offspring all the land that you can see. So he reminds him, even though they don't have kids. In verse 16, basically, when he mentions this, and I will make thy seed as dust of the earth, like they're going to multiply like dust. There's so much dust, right? They're going to have kids. They're going to multiply and measure. They won't even be able to count how many kids that they're going to have. And this is the promise that he's telling Abram. In verse 17, it says, "Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it. I will give it unto thee." Look, what he wants, even though there's no signing of a document, God told him that that was his land, and he wanted Abram to take ownership. He wanted him to be out and look and love it and say, this is mine. That's what God wanted him to do. So God's telling him, like, look around, just take it all in. This is you. This is all for you. And in verse 18, Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, right? So he had this vision, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So remember, Abram built an altar throughout this journey. He built an altar. He built one in Canaan. He did not build one in Egypt, and I'm sure it's because God didn't tell him to go there, right? He was not obedient by going there. But he comes back and he builds an altar. Hebron is where he ended up staying, so it was well watered and it had fertile crop, and it could produce. So he was rich already, or wealthy, should we say, and he still was abundantly blessed. God still gave him a plethora of things, just like he told him he would, and for him and his descendants, which we see that he's going to have as well. A couple key points that I think we should get from this. First of all, we have to stay faithful. Many of us do that, and sometimes it's hard because we're not patient people by nature. But we can't say, well, we have faith, but it's got to be unconditional. Well, I have faith. It's like, do we have faith only when things are happening? Because sometimes when that happens, what do we say? Oh, it's a coincidence, right? So if we're going to have faith, we have to know that it's always in God's timing when things happen, and we have to be obedient. We have to be obedient. And again, that comes with being patient also, which sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're just not, patient people. We want things when we want them. But again, it goes back to, having faith, and things going to happen in God's timing. God's a promise keeper. If God has told you what he's going to do, just believe it. You can mark it. You can write it down, and it's going to happen. And you don't have to worry about telling somebody else if you don't want to. If God says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's just going to happen in this time. So don't rush it. Don't lose faith. Don't falter. You don't have to backslide. You don't have to think, oh, God's forgotten about you. It's not the case. God's a promise keeper. Okay. I do hope that you got something out of this chapter. I think it was a very good chapter coming off of chapter 12. We get to see that he actually ended up back in Canaan. And again, when I said about being obedient, if he were obedient at the beginning, he wouldn't have had the issue with Lot, because Lot wasn't supposed to go with him. If we really read in chapter 12, he wasn't supposed to be with him, and he was. So it created another little burden with him, another little obstacle, should I say, not a burden, but an obstacle for him. And we'll see that with us sometimes, even as believers, and we think we're doing the right thing, doesn't mean that we won't have things that we're going to have to face, because we will. But I do thank each and every one of you all for just attending, just being here today, just signing in, and look forward to seeing you again next week. Miss Carolyn and Gary will be back. They'll start out with chapter 14. If you have any questions that you can think of, just feel free. I mean, you can always, when we're live, you can ask a question in and we'll try to answer them. Or if not, you can reread and just ask, your pastor or your parents, hey, what does this mean? And go back over it, okay? But I thank each and every one of you. I hope that each one of you are blessed. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a very good week. So until next week, have a wonderful, blessed week. Take care. Bye.